For the business cycle, what we're looking at is the typical fluctuations we would see in real GDP over time. So we don't have this nice little steady 2% growth per year over all of time. So we're going to have ups and downs in our real GDP. So we're going to call this a business cycle. So we're going to look at the different points of the business cycle. So we are going to start with point C, which is right here. So as you see, this is what's happening to um, real GDP over time, going up, going down, going up, going down. So point C, you can see, is on this upward sloping portion of this trend line. So when real GDP is increasing over time, that's called an expansion. Okay, when we're in an expansion, we're moving towards that full employment. We're having economic growth. Okay, again, real GDP is increasing. And when real GDP is increasing, typically we're going to see that unemployment is decreasing. Okay, so if we go over here to point D, so we can see in this section right here, the real GDP is on a downward trend. Okay, so to be classified as a recession by government standards, it's where real GDP is declining for at least 2 consecutive quarters. So it has to be declining for 2 quarters in a row. So in this, again, real GDP is declining. And when real GDP is going down, we're producing less by definition. So we are then going to see more unemployment because we're producing less. Okay, so if we go back over here to point A, you can see that's kind of at the top here. So that we had an expansion. Now the expansion is over, and then we're heading into a recession. So a peak is where we're at full employment or near full employment, is where an expansion ends and a recession begins. Okay, so if we then look at point B is called a trough. And that's, you can see we just had a recession, real GDP was falling, and then it's going to start increasing. So again, point B is a trough, and it's when a recession ends and an expansion begins. So that's when real GDP is at its lowest point and employment is at its lowest point. So unemployment is at its highest point. Okay, so we could also look at this using data. So if we had this data over a period of time, we could see what's happening in the business cycle. So if we look year to year at our data here, we can figure out if we're on an upward trend or a downward trend. So if we look at 2010, our real GDP was 4,567 and 0.8. Okay, so then when we go to 2011, real GDP goes up. Okay, so in that period of time, we had an expansion. Okay, so we go into 2012, again, real GDP is going up. So that's still an expansionary phase. Now, when we go to 2013, we can see that real GDP has fallen. Okay, so in that time period, we have a recession. Real GDP is decreasing. And then you can see going to 2014, again, still decreasing. So again, recessionary year. And then if we go to 2015, we see that real GDP is increasing. So then we have an expansionary period. And then 2016, we're expanding again. So that would be an expansion. So if we wanted to find the peak and the trough, what we would do is we would find the point where it's the lowest and the highest. So in this case, 2012 is when we were at the highest point, so that was the peak. And where we were at the lowest point down here in 2014, that was the lowest point, so that would be our trough. So we could use data or we could use a graph to figure out all of those phases in our business cycle.